All right, Greg. I appreciate you taking the time out to do this interview with us. I know you've done probably 1,000 interviews between now and the last 4 days, but I appreciate you taking out the time.
No, my pleasure, man. I appreciate you guys.
So, I want to get your thoughts too, and I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, but you know, you headed up the task force that investigated this case. You were the person to put out the book and the documentary that kind of unearthed this to the public. For many years, people have tried to poke at your investigation, or sorry, I shouldn't say yours, at the investigation of the task force, and tried to create conspiracy theories or other reasons as to what happened. But in the end, it seems like what you and your task force did was the absolute truth, and it seems like that was justified with Keffe D's arrest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look back for the last, 13 years, I think, since we kind of went public with the story, our narrative's never changed. We don't have to revise books. We don't have to do follow-up documentaries to modify stories. The story's been the same since the day it was originally told, based on our investigation. So that consistency ought to indicate something to people who are trying to figure out what the truth is. And we've been on the same set of tracks the whole time, and here we are. And it's great to see that what we knew back in 2009 and 2010 is what is starting to come to the surface as the truth today.
Absolutely. What did you think of Suge Knight's comments that number one, he wouldn't testify, and number two, that he said he wasn't sure if Keffe D had involvement, but that Orlando wasn't the shooter, in his words?
Well, first of all, consider the source. It's Suge Knight. If his lips are moving, he's lying. That's just the bottom line to it. He's had every type of, response to this. It was Puffy. No, Tupac's alive. No, it was Reggie and Sharitha. And, so it's Suge Knight just doing what Suge Knight always does. And that's just talk nonsense. He's in a particular predicament right now where he's in jail. And so, of course, he doesn't want to complicate his situation by coming out and being perceived by as a snitch, by anybody within the institution. So, I mean, it's just Suge Knight doing what Suge Knight has always done, and nobody should be surprised by it, and nobody should listen to it either. It's just more of his stupidity, to be honest with you. And I'll tell you this, and this is what I've been saying lately. For those people who have been wondering, why did this take so long? And that's a legitimate question, and it should be answered. But I can tell you that if one single person could be held responsible for the delay in the arrest or in the process of bringing Tupac Shakur's murder to justice, it's Suge Knight. He knew the night that Tupac was shot. He knew the moment Tupac was shot exactly who was responsible. And he chose not to say anything. In his own words, I don't solve murders. I don't help police. So, if he had just simply came in to the Las Vegas Police Department when they summoned him after Tupac was shot, and he said, hey, I looked across the car, I saw Keffe D, it was him and his crew, that case would have been solved in 48 hours.
Let me ask you this. Do you feel like it would have been beneficial for Suge to have cooperated with the prosecution, considering his current legal status?
Oh, absolutely. Had he done the right thing back when it mattered, he may have been able to avoid that prison sentence that he got as a result of his beatdown of Orlando Anderson. That probation violation that he ended up with probably would have been mitigated tremendously had he gone in and cooperated and said, listen, let's solve the murder of Tupac. It's the right thing to do. Tupac deserves it. His fans and family deserve that. And had he done that, he probably never would have went to prison. And therefore, maybe he saved death row.
Well, let me ask this: would he care to benefit if he were to have helped, let's say 3 months ago when the grand jury was doing interviews?
No. I mean, because if he wants to come in and be forthright, but that's just not going to happen. No matter what with Suge Knight, you're going to have credibility issues because he's changed his story so many times. He's lied so many times. So you've got just at the foundation of his credibility issues. And so I understand that Las Vegas needs to go out and do due diligence and try to talk to him because that's what you do as an investigator. You seek out information. But of course, Suge's not reliable, and nobody's going to give Suge a deal. He's in prison for the manslaughter case that he got convicted of, and he's responsible for the murder of Biggie Smalls. So nobody's going to want to give Suge any kind of deal, and Suge's not going to do anything without some kind of deal. So Suge, insofar as Tupac's case, is irrelevant.
Okay. Let's go back to the day that you got the original statements from Keffe D as to what really happened that night in Vegas with the proffer agreement. Why weren't the Vegas authorities invited to that proffer session along with Keffe D and his attorney?
That's a great question, and I'm really surprised that hasn't been answered before. Or I'm sorry, asked and answered before. I'll tell you what happened was when we sat down with Keffe D and we were originally going to interview him about Biggie's murder, and he says, I don't know much about that. That was likely Suge. And he says, but what I can tell you is about the Tupac Shakur murder. And he goes on and explains what happened out in Vegas and all the things that led up to it and what happened afterwards. And because we knew there were still some loose ends with Zip, potentially with Terrence Brown, maybe even trying to figure out the things that he said about Puffy, if those things were true, we wanted to utilize Keffe D as an informant at that point. Like, okay, you're cooperating with us. Let's go out and see if we can use you to solicit information from these other co-conspirators. So we took him to New York. We tried to set something up with Zip. And so when we decided to use Keffe D as an informant, we wanted to keep that information, not that information, but that situation completely confidential. We didn't know if telling other agencies or getting other people involved in this very confidential effort could compromise what we were trying to accomplish. So we kept it in-house about our use of Keffe D. And then ultimately, we did tell Las Vegas. We said we have somebody confessing to their role in your murder. They came out. They were apprised of everything that we had. And then they followed up and did their own interview with Keffe D, wherein he admitted again that he was involved. He was in the car. He handed the gun to Orlando. And then the shooting took place. So on multiple occasions within this law enforcement setting, when he's under a compelled agreement to tell the truth, he stays consistent. He says Orlando did the shooting. And this is when it's most important for Keffe D to tell the truth, because he's facing a 25-year sentence at the time. So he's got a reason to tell the truth in that situation, as opposed to when he goes out and begins to boast publicly and he starts to change some details of the story, because he got a lot of shit with his own family and with people in the neighborhood when they found out that Keffe D had ratted out his nephew and kind of threw Orlando under the bus. And so when he continues to tell his story, he changes it so that he doesn't have to continually throw Orlando under the bus.
Gotcha. Okay. Going back to when he did an interview with Vegas PD and kind of said the same thing that he said to you, was he under the proffer agreement at that interview as well?
Yes, because it was an extension of the original agreement. So that proffer session kind of covered a bit of a blanket as insofar as his protected statement. So the LAPD interview with him, or the combined interview with Las Vegas, that all kind of fell under the auspices of the proffer agreement.
Okay. You kind of mentioned how Keffe D kind of got into a lot of hot water when he, implicated his nephew Orlando as the shooter. I don't know if you've seen the interviews that Keefe does, but he always states that he saved his community by doing what he did. Do you happen to know what he means when he tries to say that he saved his community?
Yeah, I do. I mean, community is an awfully broad word, and it's an over-exaggeration of the truth. There were maybe a half a dozen other people that would have been dragged into his federal drug trafficking case. And since we didn't go ahead and prosecute Keefe on that, those people that were associated with him in that drug case simply weren't charged as a result of his cooperation. So what he's basically saying is that if I didn't cooperate, they were going to throw me in jail for all the dope, and they would have gotten all the other dope dealers that I was associated and dealing with also. So that's his community.
A lot of the people that seem to be sympathizers of Keefe D, they state, as if this is factual, and I don't know if it is, so I'm going to ask you your take on it. But is it illegal to tape the proffer agreement, and was it illegal to release it?
No, there's no expectation of privacy when you're involved when you're conducting a law enforcement interview. You can secretly tape anytime, anywhere, when it's a law enforcement investigation. The individual knows that the person you're interviewing knows that you're law enforcement. There's no expectation of privacy. There's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing inappropriate about it. It's done all of the time, and that's just that's the facts of the matter. Only ignorant people would believe otherwise.
Okay. We know that your book and documentary initially kind of brought all the conspirators to their knees, but how do you feel about, we did an interview with Vlad. He's done a couple of interviews, and he feels as though his YouTube channel solved the Tupac case. What were your reaction when you hear that?
Well, I suppose I would want to ask Vlad, define solved. What do you mean you solved the case? Did you bring attention to the case? Absolutely. Did you get information that, from the public's perspective, educated them on some of the things about the case? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's got a great platform, and he's got a lot of really interesting witnesses. But solved the case? You'd have to define what you mean by that. Clearly, he's not in a position to solve anything insofar as, within the context of what we talk about when we're solving crimes. He obviously had me on there. I told him what I knew about the investigation. He had Brennan and Ladd on there, and they talked to him, and he's had Keffe D on there, and amongst others. And so he gathered a lot of information, but the vast majority of that information was already in the public domain. Keffe D's interview had first aired on BET. So he was already in a documentary talking about his involvement in the murder long before he got on Vlad's platform. And even Vlad himself says, I was interviewing Keffe D and quoting things from his book. So clearly there's already a book published where Keffe D is disclosing his involvement. So I don't know, it's a little over-exaggerated to say that he solved it, but maybe he means something different by that. I don't know, only he can kind of clarify that.
Speaking of the task force that you were a part of, or that you headed up, that did this investigation, can you kind of break down who all was involved in the task force and what they did before you guys started detaining people?
Yeah, so first thing that that we did was we built a team, and we wanted to make sure that, because recall that our primary objective was to address and see if we could figure out what happened in Biggie's murder. So our objective was get to the truth of what happened with BIG. And so we built a team, and we thought, well, we better expand this team beyond the boundaries of the LAPD, get the resources of the feds, and in the event that we're exonerated, if we discover that the allegations against the LAPD aren't true, it's best to have this transparent body, this transparent investigative body, all saying the same thing. So if it turns out that the LAPD didn't have anything to do with it, and the claims in the lawsuit are untrue, you've got the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, the Sheriff's Department, the LAPD, everybody going, hey, we worked collaboratively on this, and we all came to the same conclusion. So that was the intent of getting a bunch of people involved. And at one time, I think we were up to 16 different people. We had guys from the ATF that were going to handle things that were gun-related. We have guys from the DEA that were going to handle things that were drug-related. We had guys from the FBI because they were going to bring in their resources and also bring in their old racketeering case that they had worked on previously. So everybody just brought their own resources to the table. We worked collectively as a team and came to the conclusions that we came to. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, you did. And the point I'm trying to get to is, for many years, people have called this, quote unquote, the Greg Kading theory. What I'm trying to, let our listeners know is that this, while you did put out the documentary and you put out the book, the investigation was a wide group of people. It wasn't just you, correct?
That's correct. I was the first one to retire and be in a position to go public with it. So that's why I'm kind of the face of that theory. But you're right, it was not me. It was a collective group of people working together. I didn't solve this alone. There was a bunch of different people adding and contributing, and we all came to the conclusions collectively. So no, I just happened to get the recognition as a result of being the one who first put it out there and went public with it.
Okay. For the people that are just now getting into this case and they're just now kind of researching it or kind of listening and doing their own kind of reading up on it, can you explain to us the difference between getting immunity and the proffer agreement? Because Keffe D got the proffer agreement. Can you just explain the differences of the two agreements?
Sure. Immunity is where you cannot be prosecuted. You're immune from prosecution. A proffer agreement is simply an agreement where you have Fifth Amendment rights, self-protection, self-incrimination protection rights. And it's within the context of that immediate scenario. So when Keefe D comes in and we say, do you want to cooperate? And he says yes, and he knows that what he's going to be telling us is incriminating, he's going to admit to being involved in criminal activity, that he says, I'm going to tell you all this stuff, but you can't then turn around and use that against me, right? That's right. We won't use what you said against you. But if this guy in the other room tells us that you are involved, we'll use that information. Or if you violate any of the conditions of this agreement, by lying about anything during this conversation, then it's all off the table. Then you don't have any protection. So that's it. It's just a simple thing where a guy can sit down and be comfortable knowing that what he tells you won't be used against him. It's kind of like calling somebody to the stand who you want to ask them questions, but in answering the questions, they're going to say, yeah, I was with him when he did it. So they might plead the fifth. And so this is very similar to that, except he will answer questions without the fear of us using the information against him. It's just self-incrimination protection. It's not immunity. Completely distinct and separate things.
Okay. So after you guys meet and you do the proffer session and he tells you about the white Cadillac, do you guys go look for this white Cadillac? Do you inform Vegas? Like, what happens as far as the car, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't been located, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But can you walk me through if there was any looking into finding that actual car? I know it was many years later.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a, needle in a haystack type of thing. Early on in the investigation, there was some information about a guy, I think his name was Monk, owning a white Cadillac, and it ended up at a repair shop. Well, it was determined that that couldn't have been the car because they were way off in the in the models and the years. So that was in the case files as a possibility. We eliminated that, and then we had information that Terrence Brown, or a relative of Terrence Brown's, had actually rented the vehicle. But so we started to do as much computer work as we could. We tried to identify if there was anything in there that we could trace back to the rental of this vehicle. And we couldn't. And we didn't want to go and confront Terrence Brown because he's an outstanding suspect in the case. He's one of the last remaining members of the conspiracy group that was in the white Cadillac. Dre's dead at that point, Orlando's dead at that point, and we don't want to go confront Terrence Brown, who probably knows that Keffe D has been picked up and that Keffe D is being questioned. So we're trying to maintain some distance with the expectation that we're next going to go after Terrence Brown, which unfortunately never happened because of what happened with the task force. But yeah, we never traced the car. We don't know. The story is that Terrence Brown's girlfriend's mother, so whatever, his mother-in-law, rented the vehicle from a Enterprise rental car over at the LAX rental car facility. But we were never able to identify exactly who rented the car or what car it was. And again, the records being that was in 1996. We're doing this now in 2009, 13 years later. The likelihood of finding a paper trail from a rental car company isn't very practical.
Okay. I want to go back to where you said you guys were going to look into Terrence Brown and try to, get him, but something happened. It unfortunately wasn't able to happen because of what happened to the task force. What happened to the task force?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, the information, once Keffe D, we decide that we're going to bring Vegas into our little operation with Keffe D, and now it's kind of their responsibility. It's really their case. Yeah, we have a little bit of ownership on the case just because of Keffe D's claims that the solicitation to murder Pac and Suge happened in LA, so we can say, yeah, we've got some jurisdictional justification for investigating this. But the reality is it's Vegas's murder. So once we hand them Keffe D and his confession, it's really up to them to continue on. Our focus needs to be back on Biggie. And for whatever reason, as far as I know, Terrence Brown was never pursued. I think he was a loose end that got away, because there would have been plenty of opportunity to wrangle him up before he ended up getting shot and killed himself. I think that the strategy should have been to do the same thing with him that we did with Keefe, build a life case against him for criminal activity, and compel him to cooperate. But that never happened.
Okay. As a veteran homicide detective, what do you feel is needed, or what would you be comfortable having to present a case against Puffy? With all the information that we know today, what would you need, in your professional opinion, to actually try to pursue him?
Well, if the claims that Keffe D made about the solicitation, the multiple solicitations, happened, and I believe there were conversations, but if those things were a true bona fide solicitation for murder, then you're going to need some really strong, credible, corroborating witnesses. You're going to need people that said, I was there when a financial transaction took place and it was very clear what that money was for. I was there when the agreement was made. I spoke with Puff about it and he told me that he'd hired these guys. You know, you're going to need some really strong, credible witnesses to support what Keffe D said. Absent that, you're dead in the water.
So do you think it'll ever be possible that anything will get to Puffy or no?
Not, in my opinion, I don't see it happening.
Okay. Let me ask you this, because people that usually aren't happy with your investigation, they often bring up or they latch on to the investigation of an officer or a detective named Russell Poole. Can you tell me what his role was in the Tupac and Biggie case?
He had no role in the Tupac case whatsoever. He wasn't involved in that. However, of course, there was always a belief, and it turned out to be true, that one had something to do with the other. Biggie was killed as a result of Tupac's murder. So if he's investigating Biggie's murder, then yeah, there's some ancillary kind of interest in that case, but he's never assigned as an investigator to investigate Tupac's murder. He didn't have that responsibility. And again, like when we stumbled onto it, we had somebody confessing to their role in it, and we're under a federal umbrella. We're working a broader racketeering case. And on top of that, once we found out that the solicitation happened in LA, now we do have some justification for looking into it. Poole never had any of those. Poole simply had Biggie's case, and only for 9 months, and he had no responsible obligation in Tupac's case at all. So anything he would have offered on that would have just been his own personal speculation or interest, I guess.
Did you see the City of Lies movie? That's I hate to say based on him, but did you see the movie? Because I watched it myself and I saw a lot of things that I feel like I never heard before. Not in a like uncovering shocking way, but in like and it's a Hollywood movie, but in an exaggeration way, like certain things like that. When they picked up David Mack, they were like, yeah, we found a death row medallion in your house, which I had never heard that to be true. But I just wanted to get your take on that movie City of Lies, if you even have seen it.
Yeah, Johnny Depp, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I did see that, or at least I saw part of it, because I do remember seeing some things. And you know, as you mentioned, it's a Hollywood production. There's a lot of creative license taken, but at some point, you know, you have a responsibility to get at least the primary narrative right. And much of what I saw was just absolute fabrication. Russell Poole, first of all, there was never a death row medallion found at David Mack's house. You know, Russell Poole wasn't involved in David Mack's arrest. So there were a lot of things that they did to kind of support a narrative that I think was a little bit deceiving.
Okay. Let me ask you this. With everything that's gone on and all the events of the last 4 or 5 days, in your professional opinion, and obviously we don't know everything yet, but what do you think are the chances that Keffe D gets convicted of the crime?
I think they're pretty strong. It's a very interesting legal quagmire that he's got himself in. It's an interesting case where, and I've mentioned this before, the star witness in in your own homicide case is you. You know, the star witness against the defendant is the defendant. So it's going to be really interesting because Keffe D's out there. He's continuously boasted about his role in the murder. And, so if he pleads not guilty, this is an interesting question. If he pleads not guilty, isn't he inferring that he lied during the proffer session then? Because if he's saying I didn't do it, and in the proffer session he's saying I did do it, well, he's now violated the conditions of the proffer session by lying about it. So he's in a real catch-22. I think I read a Rolling Stone article today, and that's what they called it, the catch-22. So it's really interesting. I think he'll plead not guilty. He'll get a public defender. They'll try to figure out what they can do with the situation. But down the road, I think when he's facing trial, he's going to probably try to plead out a lesser charge, maybe second-degree murder, with the hopes of seeing the light of day again.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's going to plead not guilty to try to see what kind of deal he can get, but we'll see. You talked about him doing all these, doing the book, doing all these interviews. He did BET, he did YouTube channels. In your personal opinion, like not professional, but personal opinion, why do you feel like he felt comfortable enough to continue to speak and brag and joke and boast about, being a part of this murder?
Well, clearly he is very ignorant of the situation regarding his proffer agreement. It appears that maybe he was under the false pretense that he had immunity, but there was never a reason to believe that. It was very clear that he was only provided protection from his own statements within the law enforcement interviews. I think people were probably telling him, hey, you need to shut it down. You need to shut up. But if you know Keffe D, he can't. When he's given an opportunity to boast about himself, he's going to take it. He's extremely narcissistic, extremely arrogant, and he's a legend in his own mind. I mean, look at the title of his book, Street Legend. But really? And so I think this is where ignorance and arrogance collided, and it was his own undoing.
Do you think it was the ego and him being a narcissist, or do you feel like it was the money that he was getting paid? I don't know about the BET thing, but I know for sure he would get paid from the YouTube interviews. Do you feel like that had a factor in it, or no?
I mean, I'm not sure that it's that kind of money. It's not life-changing money that you'd risk your future for. I don't know. I'm sure he probably could use the money. I don't think he was necessarily, you got to remember at one time Keffe D was making money hand over fist. I mean, he's just blowing kilos out of the water, man. And so he was accustomed to having a lot of money. And when you have a lot of money and then you don't have money, you try to do everything you can to get money. So, I don't know if the money was a real motive, but only, maybe he could answer that question when he goes to trial, if he goes to trial.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Big Dre being speculated as the shooter and not Orlando Anderson?
Yeah, I'm extremely confident that it was Orlando. When you've got to remember, when Keffe D's out there talking publicly, it's going to be somewhat nuanced. He had issues with his family when he threw Orlando under the bus. That came back to haunt him. Because Dre was dead at the same time when he made his original confession, so it would have been just as easy to throw Dre under the bus, but he didn't. He threw his nephew under the bus. And you've got to keep in mind the atmosphere in which he made those statements. He's in a situation where if he lies, he's going to prison for the rest of his life. He doesn't know what we know and what we don't know. So when he's sitting there and repeatedly telling the cops, I gave the gun to Orlando, I believe that. I believe that's the case. And again, you've got to also understand the gang culture. It's Orlando Anderson's job to pull the trigger. He's the one that got stomped by Tupac and Suge and the rest of that, with the rest of that group. If he doesn't pull the trigger, he's getting punked. It's his job. If you understand how gangs operate and the infrastructure and the expectations of one another, it's Orlando's job to get it to take care of that retaliation. And I've heard it said like, "Oh, there's no way, Dre was too big." Man, go sit in the back seat of a Cadillac, take one of your 300-pound friends, and then you sit in the passenger seat, grab a gun, and see if you can't easily get your arm out the window. I guarantee you can. It's not that hard. There's plenty of room back there, and if you're trying to get over somebody, it's not difficult to get your shoulders up and over and your arm out the window and start shooting. So, just go put it to the test. Go get a fat guy, put him in the car, sit next to him, and see if you can't kind of climb over and get your arm out the window. And again, primarily, it's Orlando Anderson's job. And so when Keffe D says he's handing the gun to the back seat, and Dre's like, "Nah, man, don't look at me," and Orlando Anderson saying, "Give me that motherfucker," he takes it and he takes care of his business. So that's exactly the way that ought be within the expectations of the gang culture. Orlando Anderson got jumped. It's his job to get even.
Okay. I guess I was going to say before, but I don't think you guys knew until you spoke to Keffe D. But after Keffe D had his proffer session and told you all the details of what happened that night, did anybody ever come to you and corroborate what Keffe D said? Obviously not from a witness perspective, but from like somebody that was friends with them or in their gang, or say, "Yeah, I heard so-and-so brag that they did it," or "I heard this person do it," or I even heard Keffe D talk about it. Was there ever any of that or no?
Well, some of that stuff already existed within the investigative files before I was ever even assigned to it. Some of those interviews from informants from Southside Crips, that information was already in the investigative files long before Keffe D's confession. So yeah, we had some of that information. We knew some of the people that were providing information. Quite a few people were bragging about it. Dre was bragging about it. Orlando was bragging about it. Terrence was bragging about it. Keffe D even, I think he says in our interviews, he's like, "I had to go tell those dudes to shut the fuck up." Because when we got home from Las Vegas, they're running around, letting everybody in the world know that what we just did. Which, of course, is also why the gang, everybody knew it. It was the worst kept secret. The Mob Piru knew it. Obviously, Suge knew it, which is the reason that all the gang fighting started in the neighborhood the following day. So we had a lot of that information. A lot of it circumstantial, but a lot of it was also, witness information from people that were hearing the type of statements that were being made back in the hood. So, and of course, when Keffe D is explaining all this to us, he's corroborating what we know is, the girls in the car, in the Sebring, the convertible, that got caught in the crossfire, and the additional shooting that took place between Orlando and Alton with Buntry's car. So all of these things, when Keffe's telling us, it's fitting within the known facts, which is another reason why we knew it to be true.
Did you feel like September 30th, that day, and that news that broke, did you feel like that would ever happen? Or did you pretty much after all this time just kind of put up your hands and were just like, all right, I guess they're going to just let them continue to talk?
Yeah, well, so obviously Keffe D starts talking about that whole thing in the BET Death Row Chronicles documentaries, talking about it in the book. He's going on a bunch of different podcast platforms. And I was like, this guy's out here, he's making everybody look bad. Like, the optics are terrible. You've got a guy admitting to his involvement in one of the most high-profile murders in American history. And nobody seems to be doing anything about it. Well, I was kind of getting concerned that nothing was going to get done about it, and I was getting skeptical. So when I heard that there was, obviously the search warrant happened, I knew that there was a reinvigorated investigation. I knew that ultimately there was a grand jury impaneled, and so that gave us all hope. But even that seemed to be getting dragged out. I called Darren Dupree. Before I knew about Keefe's arrest, I had called Darren Dupree that morning. I was like, yo, bro, what's up? Why is this taking so long? A grand jury's been impaneled for months now. And he's like, Greg, you haven't heard? It's like, no, what? He's like, they arrested him this morning. I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. I was in Florida. And so I heard about it, and I was just like, hell, finally. It's about time, man. So I wasn't sure anything was ever going to happen, but hell, that's one thing I'm glad I was wrong about.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were. I mean, obviously, Reggie continued to predict things on YouTube that were going to happen, and state that if Keefe didn't get arrested or indicted, that he would step away and stuff like that. So we had that, but I want to ask this because this is a question that comes up a lot, and obviously this happened before you had the task force and you were investigating, but you had access to the files. So I'm wondering if you could shed some light on this for people that don't know and that might be naive. They would say, well, if Suge and all them knew that it was Keffe D and Orlando and Big Dre and Terrence Brown, why is it, in your opinion, and maybe you know more than just an opinion on this, but why did nothing happen to them? Obviously all of them but Keffe D are dead, and most of them died from pretty violent things, but none of those violence was attached to any sort of retaliatory thing for Tupac. Why do you think that is?
Well, keep in mind, some people were getting shot in the conflict that erupted the day after Tupac was shot. So there was a little war going on. And, you've got to keep in mind how this all works within the mores of the gang world. Keffe D, and this is what he said, and this is what they would do, if you know anything about how gangs operate. They're expecting retaliation. So they get their guns, they hunker down, they're really careful about not slipping, they stay in the neighborhood, they're looking out for retaliation. And so they're doing what they need to do to avoid getting shot. Now, if you're one of the enemies and you want to get at these guys, you've got to risk your life because you got to go into their neighborhood, and they're going to see you before you see them, most likely. And so if I want to go and find Keffe D, I've got to go to a street where I think he's hanging out. And by me going down the street, it's more likely I'm going to get shot before I ever find Keffe D. Because guys on the street are going to be like, yo, man, that's that motherfucking blood. That's that slob. So, it's not as easy as you think. You don't just go knocking on somebody's door. Is Keffe D home? Yeah, let me go get him for you. Okay, cool, because I'm going to kill him. It's just, people just think these things are much more simpler than they are. And so, you just got to be practical about it. These guys knew there was going to be retaliation. They were sure that, they kind of tried to avoid slipping. Some people did get caught in some crossfire, but hopefully that answers the question. It's just not like you can go over and, hey, I think I'll kill Keffe D in Orlando today. Let me go find him.
Okay. Orlando was brought in and questioned in regards to this murder. I'm assuming his interview was in the case files that you had access to. Off of, just the top of your head, off of memory, can you shed any light on that interview, or was it just a lot of, I don't know, I wasn't there, I don't know?
With Orlando Anderson?
Yes, correct.
It was very clear that he wasn't going to cooperate. And Vegas decided, if the guy's not going to cooperate, he's going to lawyer up. You're kind of at a dead end at that point. Orlando Anderson didn't provide any information. It wasn't much of an interview to begin with. And so Las Vegas went home and empty-handed as far as Orlando was concerned. But the search warrants that were all based on Tim Brennan's work did reveal quite a bit. There was some good evidence in there. They were finding postcards from Terrence Anderson's backpack that was from Las Vegas. And, things that were indicative of him being in Las Vegas, even though when they interviewed him, he said he wasn't in Vegas. And so there was information that, that was valuable to a certain degree, but insofar as Orlando Anderson's providing any information, that wasn't happening.
Okay. And then Orlando kind of starts to, like, as you mentioned, he does lawyer up, and then he actually starts to do a few interviews himself, talking about how, and he's kind of smirking throughout the interviews, but he's saying how, he feels bad for Tupac. It was, he had nothing to do with it, that he was the victim in all this. Obviously, this is after the footage of him at the MGM comes out of the fight, so he can't deny that he wasn't there. But what is your take on why he went public and started doing, and it wasn't a lot. I want to say maybe he did like 2 interviews or something back in 97, 98. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, remember that Afeni Shakur had filed a lawsuit against him, and then he countersued a lawsuit against her. And so, there's this whole conflict going on between Orlando Anderson and Afeni. And so, he's getting interviewed by people and probably thinks that somehow is going to help support, whatever counterclaim he's making against Afeni. And so the whole thing is such a dirty fucking mess. And then you got Orlando Anderson going and testifying on Suge's behalf. So Suge pays Orlando some money. Orlando wants to open up his own little, recording gig. So he needs to come up with some cash. And so Suge solicits him, hey man, come testify favorably at my probation hearing. Tell everybody that I wasn't trying to stomp you. I'm desperately trying to, keep from going to jail. So Orlando's like, all right, give me some money. I'll go do that for you. Now imagine this. You're in a car with Tupac, your buddy, supposedly, your money-making artist. He gets shot and killed by a guy, and you're looking at going to prison because of what you did to that guy. And you're like, oh man, my only solution is to now hire and befriend that guy. So the whole story is just, you just can't make it up. And so of course the judge says, man, your testimony is shit. I can read right through your lies, because he looked on the stand the same way he did when he was interviewed and questioned about his involvement in Tupac's murder. He's just not believable. And then of course, Suge gets convicted regardless of Orlando Anderson's testimony, and Orlando Anderson goes and gets himself shot and killed not too long after.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the twists and turns of this case are fascinating.
Yeah, I almost feel like Suge's recent comments about how, Vegas doesn't know who the shooter was. And this is just my opinion. I don't, people can read into this what they will, because I don't know anything. But my whole thing is he won't implicate Orlando, because then that makes the testimony that Orlando did on behalf of Suge look bad. But I don't really know why he cares at this point, because everybody knows like the amount that he was paid and that he was paid and where they met up to exchange, the money for the testimony and all that stuff. So I just don't understand why Suge has said things, like he said Tupac's alive, but he's also said, and there's an interview, I'll have to find it, that's on YouTube that like a paparazzi did, where he actually references your DVD, and Suge says, yeah, there's this snitch on a DVD talking about everything that happened, but that's bullshit because Tupac's alive.
Again, consider the source. It's coming from Suge Knight. He's about as stupid as Keffe D, and just about as arrogant. The two of those guys ought to be cellmates, honestly. The two of them, they should make a reality show with Keefe D and Suge as cellmates. It would be absolute entertainment.
For sure. So when they announced that Keffe D was arrested, they mentioned something on the charges that there was a gang enhancement. Can you explain what a gang enhancement is, and if that makes, like, for instance, if you have a gang enhancement, do you get a bail or no? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I'm assuming that Keefe D didn't get a bail because they probably argued that he's a flight risk, that he might, leave the country. I'm assuming, I don't know this, but I'm assuming that would have been the argument to revoke, to deny him any bail, is that he's a flight risk, or that he's a danger, that he might go out and try to retaliate against any of the grand jury witnesses that he might know of. So that's probably the predominant reasons why he didn't get bail. I'm so sorry, John. I think I lost track of your question, brother.
Oh, no. I was just asking kind of what is that gang enhancement? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is it worse for him because that's on there?
Yeah, gang enhancements essentially are like additional charges. So when you have a gang enhancement or a gun enhancement, that carries more weight, so that if he gets convicted, his sentencing is going to be based on, it's going to be compounded. Whether it's just first-degree murder, he's got first-degree murder, which with premeditation. He's got a gang enhancement. He's got a gun enhancement. So it's basically just a whole package of high-level charges that ultimately, would probably, if he gets convicted, would be 25 without. So, yeah, he's potentially screwed.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because one of your more public kind of harsh critics is an former FBI agent named Phil Carson. I just want to ask, because I'm confused, if he's a federal agent, how did he get involved with a state murder investigation, which is the Biggie case, if he's a Fed?
Well, he wasn't involved in a murder investigation. He worked a unit which in the FBI is like a public corruption unit. And so once the lawsuit against the LAPD was made by Valletta Wallace and her estate, Russell Poole had published his book, and there's this, effort to try to see whether or not in court they could prove that the elements in that book were true. So, if the elements in that book were true, then there's corruption involved. So the public corruption unit at the FBI, Phil Carson gets assigned, and he begins to conduct his own little inquiry. And, of course, in a short period of time, less than a year, I believe, his department says, man, you haven't found anything here that is going to prove your case, not going to prove our case. So they decide to shut down their own investigation. And so oh God, I'd love to debate that dude. When he goes out after waiting for all these years, just sitting on all that information, knowing that his own department is now complicit in a cover-up, because if they shut him down and there was evidence to the contrary, then they're equally engaged. So it's all nonsense. You can poke holes all the way through his story. I mean, the whole thing starts with Michael Robinson, schizophrenic nut informant, who admitted to lying about the whole thing. Without Michael Robinson, you never have Amir. Without Amir, you never have David Mack. It's the fruit of the poison tree. The whole foundation of that theory is collapsed, and to continue to try to prove it to be true is a fool's errand.
Well said. With everything that's developed with the Tupac case and Keffe D getting arrested, do you feel like there will be a renewed desire for there to be closure in the Biggie case?
Well, there's always going to be a desire for there to be closure in the Biggie case. Unfortunately, Keefe D's arrest and the prosecution of the murder of Tupac, that's not going to really have any influence on moving Biggie's case forward. A different set of suspects, different set of circumstances. Obviously, because of the conspiracy theories, the LAPD case is a bit more complicated than Tupac's, a little bit more nuanced, and so I don't know. Again, it's the same thing as with Tupac's up till last Friday. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And so even though we know who killed Biggie, it's a little bit more difficult to prove because we don't have somebody out there that was involved who's boasting about it. If Teresa Swan were to go public and begin to boast about all this stuff, maybe that would change the dynamics of the Biggie investigation.
Okay. And then my final question is, do you feel like the murder weapon will ever be found in the Tupac case, or do you think it's long gone at the bottom of an ocean somewhere or dismantled or whatever? What are your thoughts on finding the actual weapon?
Yeah, I think it's hopeless. I don't know. I'd be surprised if anybody had kept that as a keepsake or a memento. I don't know. It's hard, John. I don't know if does the gun still exist? If so, who has it? Does the person who has it know that they have it? Guns get traded around and stolen, and who knows where that gun's at these days? No idea. If it ever surfaces and they can make a ballistic match to the casings that were found at the scene of Tupac shooting, that would be pretty damn interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have no opinion about whether that gun's going to be found or not.
Before we wrap up, you've kind of stated what you think, but in your opinion, does Keffe D ever see the light of the free life again, or is he done?
Well, I've heard that he's got some medical issues. I don't know what the extent of his cancer is, how advanced it is. So that could play a role in the whole thing. If he gets convicted of first-degree murder, then he's never going to see the light of day. If he cuts a deal and pleads out maybe to second and gets 20 to life with parole, what is he, 60 now? He gets out with some good time at 75, 80, I don't know. Who knows? And does he survive prison? If he's in general pop and he's convicted of killing Tupac Shakur, and you've got some brotherhood in there that honors Tupac's legacy. I mean, he's in hot water, especially considering Tupac's family history and the connections they have and how influential they are within that. For lack of a better term, the brotherhood.
I keep saying last one, but this is really last one. Napoleon of the Outlaws had an interesting take, and his take was Vegas could have solved this 27 years ago. I know you kind of spoke and said, without Suge Knight, coming forward, or without anybody really identifying who did it, that was why it was so difficult. But his point was Vegas could have solved this 27 years ago. They never wanted to solve it, and the only reason they solved it now is by Keffe D going out and doing these TV shows and doing these YouTube channels that it started to make them look bad. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I disagree with the first part. I don't think that they didn't care. I think there was a complicated case for them. It's a little bit of, there's some geographical issues. There were a lot of complications early on. They had guys from LA police departments, not LA, well, at least one guy from LAPD named Richard McCauley, but, you have got active law enforcement guys from Inglewood and from Compton, and they're working off-duty security at death row. And so you've got these Vegas guys, trying to get help from California, Los Angeles area law enforcement, and they just don't know who they can trust, who they can really rely on. And this isn't trying to throw any kind of shade on Reggie. This is just me being a practical, objective investigator that the guys in Vegas aren't really sure if they divulge information, can they control the flow of that information out here in California when you have guys that are collaborating or fraternizing with the criminal element at Death Row Records. So it was complicated for Vegas because of that. Geographically, those were some obstacles. And of course, people weren't cooperating. Eyewitnesses really didn't see anything. It's just like in Biggie's case. It all happens in the blink of an eye. So witness observations weren't particularly helpful. No license plate on the car. There's no traffic cameras. It all happens really quick. Everybody sees something different in that flash of time. They never recover any physical evidence. It's not as easy as people might think to solve some of these things when you have people that won't cooperate with you.
Kevin Hackey said this one time, and I just want to ask if it's true. Do you believe that video exists of either murder, the Tupac or the Biggie one?
Well, obviously, with the one with Biggie, we've all seen that video of the fans that were sitting in a van outside of the Peterson, and they're filming things, and we see Puffy, pulling out in the Suburban. Shortly thereafter, Biggie pulls out, and then, as in that moment of intensity when the shooting takes place, the guy accidentally hits the button on his camcorder and shuts it off for a second and then turns it back on. By the time he turns it back on, you've already got, Biggie in the intersection sitting in the truck, and Puffy running around to try to give him aid, and that's as close to having video footage of the murder. Obviously, there's nothing on Tupac's murder. Nobody was there to film that. So I don't know, again, consider the source. It's Kevin Hackey. We can spend a whole episode talking about his fabricated stories.
Yeah, I guess I just always wonder because, the fight and the MGM with Tupac and Suge and all the Death Row guys versus Orlando, there's obviously the footage inside the casino that followed them as they make their exit. Do you know if there's any footage like on the strip that showed obviously they just went to the Luxor or they did what they did, but is there additional surveillance footage of Tupac and them that night that the public hasn't seen?
I've been told that there's supposed to be some exterior footage of the parking lot or the valet area of the MGM. I've never seen that. I don't know if it exists. It would seem to be that they probably would have some surveillance footage. But I don't know what the value of that is. You just see Tupac and Suge and them leaving. Well, we already know they left. So I don't know of any other footage that exists from that night. And I'm just saying I don't know. I'm not saying there isn't any. I'm just saying I'm not aware of any, and I have never seen any.
Okay. Well, that's all I had, Greg. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your 6 billion interviews to talk to us again. So I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work that you did on the case that got us to where we are now, which is Keffe D arrested and hopefully convicted.
Yep, I agree with you, man. I mean, at least in Tupac's case, it'll never again be classified as an unsolved mystery. It's now a solved case, and that, as it ought to be. You know, he deserves to be recognized, or I should say, he deserves to be laid to rest with somebody being held accountable.